Hello, and welcome to this webinar on digital solutions to employee engagement. I'm Peter Walker, the editor of National Technology News, and as the coronavirus forces many businesses to have the majority of their staff working from home, new strategies to maintain employee engagement are becoming ever more crucial. With this rapid shift, everyone from startups to enterprise organizations are looking to effectively integrate their human and digital workforces. But what's the best way to ensure staff embrace automation and artificial intelligence rather than reject it? I'm going to hand over to our panel of experts for a discussion on these topics before coming back at the end to ask a few more questions. So let me introduce them first. Today I am joined by Jason Martindale, who is Vice President for EMEA at Symphony. He has over 20 years of experience in tech transformation, with the last 3 at Symphony, culminating in the strategic acquisition by Sykes Enterprises. Jason works cross-functionally across the Sykes family of companies to help clients design and deploy innovative solutions that digitize operations for sustained efficiency and growth. We've also got Steve Gush, who is Vice President for Digital Solutions at Sykes. He's been part of the technology group there for 15 years and recently joined the newly formed Sykes Digital Services to develop solutions using Sykes Digital Group of companies, including intelligent automation through Symphony. We've got Leanne Richardson, who is an RPA project manager. She is a specialized consultant with experience in delivering business-driven technology projects across a range of sectors from retail to finance. Recently, Leanne initiated and delivered an RPA project into one of the world's largest institutional asset managers, with over 16 processes implemented and live in 12 months. And last but not least, Vernon Bryce is a leadership executive consultant specializing in employee engagement and workplace experience. He's previously led teams at KPMG, Gallup, and IBM Connexa, working with clients like GSK, BAE Systems, Kone, and Sodexo, and now mentors executives through his own practice. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jason now for the next part of the webinar.
Thanks, Peter, and I'd obviously like to extend my welcome to our audience as well for this discussion. It's great to have Leanne, Vernon, and Steve sharing their insight today. And very quickly, for those who may not know Symphony, we're a leading global professional services firm focused on designing and deploying intelligent automation solutions and digital workforces at scale to organizations, helping them achieve significant business outcomes and help them shape the future of work. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll explore several areas and we'll address the effect of a digital workforce can have on the employee engagement in the back and front offices of operations. How can automation enhance flexibility in the workplace, such as working from home? And then how automation is contributing to operational resilience during the COVID pandemic. So with that, let's dive in, and if I may start with you, Leanne, can we look at your experience with Nuveen, and firstly some context, if we may, who are Nuveen and what was the interest around automation for them?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Leanne. I was asked at Nuveen, who is one of the world's largest asset managers, specifically commercial asset manager. I was asked to implement RPA at Nuveen, basically to address, I guess, current problems that within the finance and accounts payable area, and to provide automation when it's possible to address highly skilled knowledge workers and individual contributor roles in high-cost locations such as London. We were able to apply automation beyond the traditional approach of large-scale, low-value tasks, and demonstrated successfully that even for hundreds of transactions rather than thousands, the benefits to employee engagement superseded all expectations.
So you mentioned there finance and IT, Leanne. Were those the main kind of areas that you was looking to focus on from an automation perspective? And if that was the case, how quickly were you able to achieve this?
So the project started off just with finance, and also very quickly went into some IT tasks. So it was finance driven and predominantly accounts payable. So initially we started with 3 pilot processes, which concluded very quickly the benefits to the team for automation and gave the C-Circle some commitment to further invest. I think it demonstrated very quickly the impact it had on employees and their engagement to work with the new technology. So subsequently since that, finance and IT have implemented over 20 processes running. They have saved a number of hours, but the whole reason for it was that it increased the employee engagement. And this was taken in a survey where 88% saw that it has increased their employee engagement, and it was keenly felt in job satisfaction. So it was an opportunity to work on more engaging tasks, and the success of RPA given 60% more users encouraged to seek out further processes to automate. This opportunity to seek out more potential processes to automate is having the by benefit of employees becoming more involved, helping to solve the workplace problems, and in turn, new skills are being developed subconsciously through communication and analysis.
Yeah, I remember working together with yourselves and obviously with Nuveen, that identifying those really strong automation pilot candidates, and then to be able to really implement and deploy those really quickly was very important. Not, as you said, not just for the benefits of the automation itself, but also to instill confidence in the executives to further invest in the program and then roll out more and more automation. You just started to touch onto it there, but what are the kind of changes you've seen now, and what kind of changes has the Nuveen management team seen in their teams in terms of engagement and their ways of working since automations really took hold within the company?
From a management perspective, management have felt the impact and believe automation has given the opportunity for their team to be more questioning on why a process has been done in a certain way and been done that certain way sometimes for many, many years, and found their team to be more probing and questioning of a process. And it's this engagement that has created this new, we can do this atmosphere, we can change it, we can help be more efficient. And that's spilled over into other tasks that haven't or can't be automated. So as automation has provided ability for all tasks to be completed faster and accurately, this has had the flow and benefit of employees completing unautomated service requests in a more engaging and timelier manner, and also being aware of upstream and downstream impacts. So something some teams have never really focused on before because they've been so head down in the detail that they haven't been able to look at what are the impacts of what they do to downstream people. So delivering high level of service on other tasks that involve more human contact is now possible when time pressures have been removed from the mundane tasks through automation. And it's these high human touch tasks that the team now have the time to do, and these aspects of their role correctly. And combined with the positive feedback from their customers and managers, that's given the employees the most satisfaction.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, Leanne, we see with other organisations as well, where it feels as if the employees are being released to do the kind of the jobs that they want to do and the jobs that they believe they should be doing. And obviously when we're having higher levels of service and higher levels of interaction with customers, whether that be internal and external, obviously the business can start to see an impact around that. But with that in mind, what do you think has been the real big standout impact since implementing automation?
I think there are three key ones. The first being the knock-on positive impact on other tasks that involve the higher human interaction. That probably wasn't one of the things that we really thought would happen, but that's really been a big eye-opener. It's the hunger to seek out the other opportunities, which is displayed as more engaging to help solve workplace problems, increasing the team playing and developing skills that these people may not have had the opportunity to show and grow. So it's almost they didn't know what they didn't know or what they could do before until they're presented with this opportunity. And thirdly, the overwhelming level of thanks from teams who sometimes feel that they're overlooked being in the back office, and that they too have skills to contribute to the team and the organization.
Now, that's really interesting, and those three are very, very powerful, just hearing you talk those back. Vernon, switching to you, if I may, and from in your experience from running many dozens of engagement studies, how do these and other results of increased engagement impact businesses and employee performance that you can see?
Well, I really enjoyed the presentation, first of all, and The standouts for me, Leanne, were the involvement, the attention that management gave this, the new skills, the questioning, the easy task or easier tasks. And a really big one that you just mentioned was feeling not overlooked. The contribution was not overlooked. The feeling of being done with rather than being done to. These are all great signals and part of what Peter said earlier, which was, is there a best way of integrating, the human touch with the intelligent automation? I mean, it's been known for years, nearly 100 years actually, that management attention and variety and care makes a big difference. So what I'm hearing here is several of the main drivers of engagement just happening before our eyes, really. And as you say, Jason, there are certain practices, like caring culture, like training, clarity, communications, which will increase engagement. But the biggest finding nowadays, probably for the last 10 or even 15 years, is the massive impact these practices, these integrations make on service, delivery, loyalty, quality of service, productivity. I mean, these things have been known probably now for about 20 years. What has been less known, and companies are quite coy about it, I think, is the actual impact on the commercials. Typically, and as you and I have discussed for a long time now, the average loyalty increases between 10 and 20%. That means people stay, and there's evidence that 85% prefer to stay when these kind of practices happen. And on average, again, there's a whole range of studies I could quote, but I won't. But places like Corporate Leadership Council, CIPD, the Engage for Success organization, as well as the Institute for Employment Studies in UK, they have been quoting for years 20% improvements in performance, twice the top performance. People who are engaged are in the top performers. And even more interesting, I think, and we need a hard-nosed approach to this. What difference does it make? And we're already hearing from Leanne and soon from Steve that studies have shown that you can get 20% increases in operating income. There was a famous study of a load of banks in the USA and a load of banks in UK, and I'll just finish on those two. Where engagement in USA in I think 50 different financial institutions was greater than 70%. There was a 20% increase in operating income. What's even more interesting is where the engagement's low, like 50% or thereabouts, which doesn't sound very low, but it's anything under 70 is pretty low. There was a 30% drop in operating income. And one of the findings in the UK banks, there's about 200 banking units which were studied 5 years or so ago now, that there was an increase of 10% in engagement through these practices, which led to a 4% increase in sales. And this is banking sales. They're not exactly the most adventurous of organizations, but actually they have been really adventurous in engagement. There's a bit of a rule of thumb now in British banks that if you can increase engagement by 10%, you'll get a 4% increase in sales. That's very, very generic, but those are the kind of impacts that can be made on brand, on productivity, on quality, on service delivery, as well as concrete team performance. So there's many things to be won here, provided these practices that Leanne's already started to describe are integrated and embedded within the intelligent automation. I think those are my immediate reactions, Jason.
No, thank you, Vernon, and you never cease to fail on providing us with some very hard facts and statistics. So I do thank you for that as well. So, but again, I think for the broader audience here, I think when we look at the topic of employee engagement, some organisations can see this as more of a is it cultural? Is it more that sits kind of within HR as a business kind of interest? Where absolutely not. This is a real employer initiative. That there are some real hard benefits that if organisations are looking at a digital workforce and implementing automation solutions, the impact that a higher increased employee engagement can have on the business is really tangible and really does need to come out in any kind of business case. And I know from Leanne's perspective, working with the senior executives at Nuveen, that stakeholder alignment and management and buy-in was absolutely critical. And when we was working together on that program, getting those early wins in but visible for the organization were really imperative. But now the benefits are really starting to drive through. Leanne, just coming back to you, just finally talking about Nuveen, and then also I'm sure there'll be other questions as we continue. But with the challenges from the ongoing COVID pandemic, and I know you mentioned earlier on about things like operational resilience in the context working with Nuveen, but with those challenges from the ongoing pandemic, how's automation helped with that kind of operational and business resilience?
COVID-19 has put unexpected and unbelievable pressures on all organizations, just not Nuveen, and also place that pressure on individuals and families. Automation, I think it's fair to say, was never intended to be the continuity plan for, I guess, any organization. However, it has become that, thankfully. However, the pressure that automation is removed from the tasks that still need to be completed, regardless of location, has allowed the team to continue to perform with some minor modifications within deadlines and without significant task pressure, which is a huge win given the unexpected and, I guess, swift process that everyone then had to find themselves working from home. So this hugely unusual circumstances we find ourselves in due to COVID-19 have not added any additional pressure on the automated tasks, and in turn has allowed the team to continue operate remotely, but also allowed the time to spend longer on those team and well-being meetings, the remote coffee mornings, or people just having a bit more extra time to say, how are you? And listen to the response rather than give them the, oh, yeah. So it has contributed to creating a more caring and considerate and respectful workplace and being able to cope with what the pandemic has presented.
No, thank you for that, Leanne. And I know, Vernon, we were talking some weeks back now, but I think you mentioned where the pandemic has really thrust the employee engagement, but also the well-being and how are you from the employer perspective now. It really has put a kind of a real specific lens on that now, because before that was being seen as, other kinds of HR initiatives and kind of engagement initiatives, but now with the pandemic, there is a real focus on that wellness and well-being and just really being able to get closer to employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Leanne was saying, and in her case, you don't need an epidemic, but if you do have an epidemic, you can still involve, you can still pay attention, you can still care. Coffee mornings, how are you? And you mean it. Good morning, and you mean it. But also the not being overlooked, I think, is the important one. So these team calls are vital. It's probably, as we might hear from Steve soon, actually, the way the managers treat and the leaders treat this whole process. I mean, to the top managers, the well-performing, well-advised managers and leaders, it's quite natural for them to involve and attend and care and develop new skills and ask questions of those in the front line. So you're absolutely right. There is continuity to be had, and a number of practices which we're discussing now can be listed and just got on with. For most people, it's obvious. For some, it isn't so obvious. But some of those things we've mentioned already about involvement, not being overlooked, asking questions, make an immense difference, whatever the context.
No, thanks, Vernon. And Leanne, thank you again. And I'm sure we'll be back to you with other commentary as well. But I think what you've been able to share with us in this very short period of time at the initial of this discussion really is around how automation has been able to help and support that real back office function from within finance, but also to see how the teams within that function have now really started to change their attitudes and their appetite to look to see, how can I now do things differently? How can I continue to do things better? But more importantly, how can I find more time in my working day to do the higher quality and the higher level tasks that I really want to do within the organisation? So that's been really interesting to hear. Steve, turning to you, and I'm conscious that you've been the kind of the silent partner on the call so far on the webinar. Switching from that back office focus to more to the front office and that customer focused operations area of a business, how are you seeing automation and digital transformation and digital solutions help to improve employee engagement?
Hi, Jason. Yeah, I think when we think of the front office or the contact center, it's really the people side of the business. It's where you've got the customer making contact directly with the company themselves. And we then focus on, if you look at what's the sort of measures of success of a contact center from exec on that leadership side, that senior management that Vernon was talking to, it's all going to be what's our CSAT scores, what our net promoter scores are, what our response times are. If you boil that down to reality, it boils down to, are we answering that customer in a timely way? Are we dealing with them in a civilized fashion? And are we responding to their challenges and resolving their needs, their problems, or helping them order whatever that is? And there's a real divide between those two that automation is starting to help with. So let me just explain that a little bit further. That whole concept of you want to be able to talk to the contact center and you want that agent to be able to respond to whatever question you throw at them, or whatever problem that you give them, or whatever task you want that company to do. That means that that agent is actually facing off from these multitude of departments inside of organizations, from operations to manufacturing to sales to marketing to shipping, and all of them have their own little ecosystem. They all have their own little services. They all have their own way of managing their own data. So to answer what seems like a really simple customer query, that agent often has to deal with multiple systems in the back end. What makes it even worse from an employee engagement perspective is we hire people in the contact center because they're good at having relationships, of talking to people, of building that sort of customer care concept. They're not. They don't want to be in a job that involves them being silently looking at a screen trying to search for information. So this is where automation is starting to make a big difference. By being able to have the digital assistants be able to go and talk to all of those multiple backend systems and publish that information to the agent when they need them, directly relevant to the person that they're talking to, removing the need for them to go and deal with all that complexity, allowing them to focus on the customer. If they can focus on the customer, they can get a better understanding of what the problem is, they can help fix that problem first time round, and they can drive all of those stats, increasing the CSAT, increasing the NPS, which is so important for businesses, especially where the majority of business now, that is your interface with your customer. It's what you say within your marketing department, and it's what happens on that communication within the contact center. So really, you can boil that down to, automation is taking the robot out of the person. So the contact center employee can just do that human aspect of it, and he's got the bot there to do that mundane, repetitive, sort of very focused task to allow the agent just to deal with that customer and drive the desired results. I also just, one final point on how that's engaging is it's a people business. So contact centers are really successful by the people they employ. And if we employ these people that are good at communication, they're not good at these complex back-end tasks, then if we carry on giving them those tasks, that just drives attrition. It just forces people away. But if we take that away and automate that, we make it way more efficient, but we also allow them to do the job that they want to do in the first place, which also helps with their employee engagement and their attrition rates.
No, that's really insightful, Steve. And I think, particularly when you're talking there just in the final kind of sentences around, attrition rates and trying to, attract and retain, particularly, is a big challenge, particularly in, large contact center, call center environments. And I know we've spoken to this with a number of client organizations regarding flexible working and how that can also be a big driver or a big impact on employee engagement. but that's also, a real challenge that organisations are trying to face. And obviously with COVID pandemic, which we've just been talking about as well, that this has never been more so. So from what you're seeing, what role is automation being able to play to provide more flexibility around the workplace?
I think it's been invaluable. Home-based working for agents isn't necessarily new. We've been doing that at sites for over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, but it was a very small percentage of the market. It really fitted with highly seasonal, highly flexible sort of work patterns. If you've got call patterns that are peaking in the morning and peaking in the afternoon, you want to have people on split shifts. That's really difficult to do if they're in a centre. Nobody wants to work for 2 hours, drive for a couple of hours, and then come back to work the next, a few hours later. But actually doing split shifts at home, a lot of people would accept those sort of shift patterns, and it really helps. There's also that case of this seasonality split, being able to get other people doing those jobs and being able to train them really quickly. And that's what we're seeing with automation, is helping both of those from two sides. One is to be really agile. You want to be able to push your data out to wherever that needs to be. It could be in people's homes, or it could be in sub-branch offices, or it could be in big contact centres. Automation helps you control that, because you no longer need to get that agent talking directly to all those multiple backend systems with all of that data. You're just publishing the data as and when the agent needs it. So that really helps with the security aspect, especially when you're moving that workforce out and making them more agile by working in sort of virtual stands, either at home or in the office or wherever they need to work from. The other one is by having just a single process, and the bot does the rest of the complex work, it makes training that a lot easier. So especially for large volume call types, it means that you can provide a digital assistant to help do some of the complex work. So training is easier, so onboarding and bringing people up to speed is a lot quicker as well. So it's really been invaluable with driving agility and scalability, which has been critical over the last sort of 2 or 3 months.
Thank you, Steve. And Vernon, I know that in your vast experience, that I know you've also worked in contact centres and large customer service environments as well in the past. And so in your experience, how have you seen increased levels of engagement within a contact centre? How have you seen that impact, the levels of engagement and performance?
Great question, Jason, as always. It's remarkable how similar contact centre behaviours are, even between different kinds of organisations and cultures. 2 things at the workplace that I've noticed in particular, then there's a couple of other things I want to mention. One was, as we mentioned earlier, there's an awful lot of collaboration going on between agents, popping over the pod and saying how you're doing or whatever, and on the tea break or the coffee break or whatever, going off. And in my experience, or observing and focus groups and observing these folk, it's remarkable that no one's really talking about Panorama or Coronation Street or whatever. They are actually talking about challenging circumstances, challenging tasks, challenging clients, challenging questions. How do you answer this? How do you answer that? So where these practices that Steve is mentioning are going well, where people have been involved and they're not being overlooked in terms of management's care and attention, it tends to rub off on the team spirit, and not just in coffee breaks either. It's in out of work interactions. So there's 2 things at the workplace I've noticed, but the other thing I would emphasize, and Steve did touch on it, that it's the managers and the leaders that make a difference as well. There are certain things that, like Leanne has mentioned, at the workplace, the care, the training, the involvement, the communications, the difference it makes to be able to ask questions, feeling of being cared for. But the other things that I've noticed is that managers are called fair and recognizing, communicative, and helping people with their problems rather than saying, get back to it or whatever. So there are certain manager and team leader behaviors that make a difference. There's probably 3 or 4 really critical ones, which Steve has mentioned. And then for leaders to continue to reinforce this effect, this continuity of engagement, which impacts on the bottom line and the middle line, would be, leaders that inspire trust and confidence, and leaders that focus on quality and customer service, as opposed to other things that they might want to focus on. And one of the interesting ones that leaders holding managers to account is one of the research findings. So what I've noticed is it's almost like not a chain of command, but a chain of collaboration which is going on, and everyone is excited by these changes. And I think we've heard now already from Leanne and Steve that these changes operate at least 3 levels. The work face, between workers, that is, and agents, but also the managers, the immediate managers, and the leaders. So these working practices, it isn't, as we all know, intelligent automation isn't a guarantee of performance, but I do think, as Peter was saying earlier, it's the best way is to harness this integration of the human and the tech factors, and that makes a heck of a difference.
Thank you, Vernon, and also obviously thank you, Steve, for enlightening us on what it's like really, as Vernon's now talking about at the coalface, but definitely within those those contacts and call center environments where that interaction with the customer is so critically important, but also so powerful from a business performance perspective. Peter, I'll hand back to you because I think you may have a number of other questions that have been gathered since we've been on.
Indeed, yeah. I wanted to start with you, Steve, actually. How do you effectively integrate a human and digital workforce, and how does that impact employee engagement?
That's a great question, and the key word there is definitely integrate. It's not an either-or equation. It's not humans doing work or machines doing work. As humans, we have skills that machines just can't replicate: emotional intelligence, problem solving, relationship building, etc., etc., etc. The machine, the automation, also has skills that can't be replicated to the same level by humans. Just the speed of being able to do calculations, repeating repetitive tasks exactly the same, time in, time out, the whole time, retrieving large amounts of information from multiple sources simultaneously. Now, combine those two differences, combine that machine and that human, integrate them, and all of a sudden you've got these super-powered employees that are focused on meeting the customer need while the machine is doing all the repetitive, laborious, mundane tasks in the background. Employees are engaged when they're doing what they're employed to do. In our case, with front office agents, is to serve that customer, to resolve their needs, not to complete repetitive, mundane tasks on a screen while the customer gets ever more frustrated. So it's really, that key word is definitely integrate. It's allowing the automation to really work hand in hand with that human to serve your customer.
Okay, that makes sense. A question for you, Vernon. What happens to employee engagement when digital change happens? And has it increased due to remote working?
Well, there's at least 2 or 3 sort of perspectives there, aren't there? Starting with the word change, change is either seen as opportunity or threat, or both. And typically the question to ask as a change consultant is, what happened last time you tried to change something? And history makes a heck of a difference. And the thing that kind of, as Steve has touched on already, and Leanne too, the thing that makes the difference is management's attention to that frontline working group, team, individual, because they know the ins and outs of the systems, and that respect and that recognition and that sort of care for listening to what they have to offer is the thing that makes the difference. And I suppose years and years ago, we just thought, oh, well, it's just a thumb we're hiring or a couple of fingers. But as Steve's saying, there's a lot more to it than that. So yeah, the integration happens. It's to make an immense difference. But when you're saying that, is it, what happens with digital change? I think people feel valued if they're asked. They feel respected when they are asked. And it isn't a question of whether, does engagement work? It's how to make it work. And back to your last point about, remote working, I think it isn't the remoteness. It's the connectivity between team members and the team leader and the members that makes the difference. So it's probably more of an urgent and bigger appetite to collaborate. So you'll probably see lots of informal connections going on between team members, and that should be strongly encouraged. And I love that point Leanne made about the coffee morning or the coffee chat or whatever, That's the thing that makes the difference. Whether it's home working or workplace in the office, business as usual, if ever, it's more to do with the behaviours and the maturity of the organisation to recognise that everyone's in it together, and it is a hierarchy of collaboration, not a hierarchy of power.
Okay, yeah, and sticking with that kind of theme then, Leanne, perhaps, what digital assistance are businesses actually demanding due to lockdown in your experience?
I think businesses are demanding the processes that allow them to be able to work from homes. So maybe addressing some audit concerns that allow processes to still be run from, and those being executed from home rather than in the office. So there's probably more validation and audit checking processes that are being written to be able to satisfy the internal and, in certain, I guess, segments of the market, those regulatory controls where they need to prove that those correct controlled measures are in place.
Okay, and Steve, did you have any kind of points on that?
Yeah, what we've seen is that digital assistants are really helping businesses be more agile. Automating those processes and acting as that front door to multiple complex systems does make it easier to train people to do these complex jobs. And to Leanne's point as well, by taking the direct access away makes the the compliance on following that process and security on what data people access and when are much more automated and controlled, regardless of where the person is, which is enabling that agility. So this is enabling the work to be done where it needs to be done in a scalable, secure and compliant manner, and all of those boxes need to be ticked. And we're seeing automation play a big part in that.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's the question that kind of overarches this whole webinar. Vernon, perhaps, what essentially drives employee engagement, and how can digital tools help with that?
Well, I think it's to do with learning from people who are in the know, and this front line is smarter, wiser, more experienced, and they've been experiencing challenges and problems which they've overcome in many different ways. No system's perfect. They know all the ways through it and round it and to resolve it. So I think by involving people more, recognizing they've got a lot more to offer than perhaps just that hand or that thumb, is the beginning of it. And I think the smart leaders and managers and consultants, for that matter, have already seen this, and that's where they start. They start with the cold face, and they encourage people to talk about opportunities. And one of the things I loved about Leanne's piece, and Steve touched on it as well, was the increase in hunger, the increase in appetite. Once you start opening the box, you get some lovely, lovely stories and changes and recommendations. So the Pandora's box is open, and it will get you into higher engagement. It will get you into higher performance. So learn from the best.
Yeah. And back to Jason, maybe for a final question. How can intelligent automation help companies attract and retain employees? I guess we kind of touched on it already.
Yeah, I think Steve did mention it. He coined the phrase, taking the robot out of the human, and that's been one of our mantras and one of the industry's mantras for many years now. I think being able to remove those manual, repetitive, and monotonous tasks, which and Leanne alluded to that right at the beginning. Organisations, when we're employing talent into an organization, we're employing them because of their talent and what they can contribute to the business and how they can grow within the business, not because we're going to get them sitting in front of a screen punching in data. So being able to release that talent, I think, has a massive impact, potentially, specifically, on retention, but then being able to attract the right talent. If you can align jobs and roles and actually deliver on that promise, because what the role entails does need these skills, and this is what we need you doing, rather than doing lots of administrative tasks and then 1/5 of your time will be doing the stuff that you really excel at and what really makes a difference to the business. So being able to really tune down and remove and mitigate those monotonous, repetitive tasks and releasing that capability from individuals that can really drive the business forward, that's where organizations start talking about becoming employers of choice. You know, you see lots of recognition out in the marketplace around, you know, you're in the top 100 employer and those types of things. They're not just small little badges of honor. You know, people really stand by those, and that does differentiate in the market. So again, being able to enable an employee to be able to do the things that they really aspire to want to do and excel at, you know, not just the business performance, but that really does give the organisation an advantage in the marketplace.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. I suppose to start to wrap things up, for our audience today, what would be a kind of final comment or words of experience when thinking about getting automation to drive employee experience? Maybe Leanne first.
I think in a short period of time, businesses, no matter their size or their volumes, can implement automation and benefit from the results of increased employee engagement and giving them opportunities that they never thought existed within that role before.
Okay, that makes sense. Vernon, any final thoughts?
Just one, really, in a word, metrics. And the hard-nosed stuff is equally important to the softer stuff, although they both blend and make a difference. So in 4 words, process metrics. Never lose sight of the process metrics, we won't. And secondly, outcome metrics. So those would be my 4 final words: process metrics, outcome metrics, which will underpin everything we've been talking about. And we will have to present this to a higher order of folk who have higher accountabilities and choices on investment. And so I think the metrics are the thing that's going to make a heck of a difference. But we now know a bit more about what will drive the metrics.
That makes sense, yeah. And Steve, a final thought from you?
I'd say the final thought is high-performing contact centres need high-performing people, and automation can help get rid of the work that those guys don't want to do and make them even better at the work that they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, Jason, it's just over to you for some final thoughts then.
No, thank you, Peter. And you know, firstly, I've really enjoyed the discussion today. You know, hearing how automation and an integrated digital workforce can really increase employee engagement and the impact that an increased employee engagement can have on productivity, customer experience, and then overall business efficiencies and performance. You know, in particular, I found it really interesting to hear about how Nuveen has implemented in a really short period of time automation that is really now starting to make a material impact on engagement levels. You know, I think Liam was mentioning earlier, you know, there's some 88%, I believe, of who've been surveyed have said that, you know, they're much more satisfied in their jobs, and they're looking at better ways to do their tasks and seeking out more automation and more efficiencies. You know, where we've been hearing about, you know, highly engaged employees are significantly more productive, you know, which is a major contributor to successful businesses, but it's also helping retain that talent. You know, so we shouldn't be underestimating any of these factors when we're looking at building business cases for intelligent automation and digital workforces. And then looking at automation in enabling a much more flexible workforce and a much more flexible working environment. Again, much more engaging, but being able to enable people to work from home or work from much more flexible or agile locations. You know, we need to be 24/7, we need to be readily available, we need to be accessible by our customers. So that's very, very important. And then finally, you know, hearing how automation is really making businesses more resilient, you know, even more so now because of the COVID pandemic that everybody's experiencing. But we're really seeing now that organizations aren't necessarily looking at automation as a potential opportunity or something we're considering. They're really putting this now as a cornerstone in many digital response strategies moving forward. So I think today's conversation has been, you know, as insightful for me as it has for hopefully all of the audience on here. And if any of the audience have got any questions regarding today's discussions or want to learn more about how automation can drive employee engagement in their organizations, you know, visit us at symphonyhq.com or even follow us on LinkedIn at Symphony Ventures to find out more. We're constantly communicating out into the marketplace. And then finally, Peter, just thank you again for yourselves for at National Technology News for helping us pull this together, and obviously for our speakers with Leanne, Vernon and Steve, and hope that everybody's found this of interest and that we've given real food for thought and inspired people to really explore how automation and the digital workforce can help their organisations.
Thank you, Jason, and you've basically done my my sign off for me. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you to our speakers.